The world is faced with a quadruple environmental crisis: climate change, the biodiversity crisis, pollution, and the freshwater crisis are all coming together, and they're all interconnected. They'll affect every country and everyone. Sadly, the pace of action, what we're doing, is too slow and too low, and it's not matched by the urgency of the challenges before us. But there's a lot. We know what to do, we know how to do it, but we need to mobilize people to actually act. And I'm very privileged today to have an extraordinary guest to our leader interview as part of the CUGH Leaders Series. I'm Dr. Keith Martin, the Executive Director of CUGH, and our guest today is Dr. Pushpam Kumar. Dr. Kumar is a senior and economic advisor to the UN Environment Program. He is a global leader in valuing ecosystems, and you'll hear how important that is to policymakers and to anybody involved in development. He's done extraordinary work in how do we get to a green, sustainable economy. So with that, you can look at his bio. It's much too long to talk about here. But Dr. Kumar, welcome, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Keith Martin. It is really a pleasure to be talking to you and your audience. I understand they come from different background in terms of disciplinary training. So I'm very, very pleased to be with you.
Wonderful. And so you've been an extraordinary work in valuing ecosystems. But before we get into the meat of the issue, why did you go down this road? What compelled you to take this path?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I mean, indeed. My training in economics always taught me about the trade-offs and the conflicting choices. I mean, you can go ahead on one criteria, but you lose on some other criteria or yardstick. That is what the trade-off is. Because the resources are limited and the need or desire are unlimited. So how to resolve the trade-off? And that is where economics comes and helps. But then still I was in the domain of economics, fiscal monetary policies and the trade policies. But when I try to understand the nature, the environmental sectors, and that happened in late 80s, when I heard some of the thinkers and the conservation experts, then I thought, wow, what we are talking about equilibrium or stability in terms of economics is one side of the story. The big side of the story is that we, the Homo sapiens, and our activities, we are embedded in nature, in atmosphere, in soil, in groundwater, in surface water, in coastal or marine. So without their contributions, our production, distribution, and consumption have limited possibility to expand forever. Now, how to bring nature into economic activities? How to bring the environmental sides into conventional economics policies and their tools and approaches? That naturally came to me. But of course, I was not the first one. There have been series of philosophers, experts, the economists who have been talking about it. But then I thought that is something where I would like to explore further, how to capture, demonstrate the value of nature for society, for humans. And that's how this journey began.
And that value, we've been consuming nature forever with no value put to it. So let's talk about if somebody asks you, what is natural capital, Dr. Kumar, what would you say?
So one caveat here. When we talk about value, I'm not saying that whatever humans can capture as the value of nature is the only value of nature. The value of nature goes much beyond this economic value. So point number one. Second, things in nature are not waiting for us to go and put a dollar value on nature and only then they are useful to us. That is not important. What is important? That the nature becomes one of the, managing nature is a management issue the way you manage financial portfolio, for example. Similarly, we have to manage nature in a way that we can manage trade-offs, resolve them. And in that context, economic valuation is useful. So I thought I should clarify this position. Second, natural capital, very contemporary. Natural capital is talk everywhere. Somehow until 2016, it was at least not appearing in the UN documents. But in UNEP resolution, natural capital came. Basically, natural capital are just like any other natural asset. So topsoil, 6 to 8 inches of topsoil. That is the basis of our food system. Groundwater, surface water, of course, forest, fish, and atmosphere, clean atmosphere. They all provide valuable service to the humans. And we call those services as the benefits. And it will be a gross underestimate if we say their value is high. In fact, we cannot survive, we cannot be on this earth if those services are not there. So the value is very high. So natural assets or natural resources which provide services to society, but they also require investable funds for sustenance of those services. So you need restoration, you need finance for restoration. So if that is the situation, we will call them natural assets as natural capital. One of the additional reasons to call natural asset as natural capital is basically to treat natural assets as important as other types of assets. For example, manufactured capital or human capital, they are important, but so is natural capital. So idea is not to treat natural asset as natural capital and start trading in wrong direction. But the idea is to give importance to natural sector as much as we give it to other sectors.
It is ironic, isn't it, that we can put a value on a car or a tie or a sweater, and yet we can live without that, but we cannot live without the ecosystem services that underpin our health and our well-being, and yet we put no value on it whatsoever, or have not put value on it in many ways. But to understand the situation we're in, Dr. Kumar, we are suffering from, I mentioned, that quadruple crisis. Can you just share with us where we are in terms of climate change and biodiversity losses in particular, versus where we should be?
Yes, so I can share with you, Dr. Martin, about the situation which many of us know already. Let's take biodiversity, the variety and variability of life forms ranging from DNA to biomes level. They're under serious trouble. I mean, IPBES, Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which is an intergovernmental process. And the scientists have come out with the finding that 1 million species are under risk of extinction. Those species are important because our other ecosystem services are banking on them. So that is biodiversity. But if you take other very tangible and popular components of biodiversity, for example, mangrove, let's see, or wetland. Wetland, there are statistics available that since 1950 until now, we have lost around 40% wetlands. And we know, the limnologists know, that wetlands are the kidney of the landscape. They perform very important ecosystem services: water recharge, bioremediation, recreation, biodiversity, wildlife, even farming. Sometimes they depend upon wetland, and those are going away. Now, this is a serious trouble. So that is biodiversity. Climate, so much of talk. We know that we are not going to be near what Paris Agreement came out with, 1.5 degrees Celsius. Forget about it, unfortunately. In fact, as the current trend goes, and what we have seen in Sharm el Sheikh in COP of UNFCCC, we will be somewhere 3.2 degrees Celsius. And what we see around in terms of heat waves, flooding, uh, drought, and then damages to crops, human lives, are for anybody to see that climate change is for real. I mean, we have passed that stage where the debate used to be whether the climate has changed or is changing or not changing. That is past. I mean, we can see. But more than that, there are a large number of countries. And when I say large number of countries, I'm thinking of SEATs, a small island in developing states. Some of the head of states from SEATs that are saying, look, guys, for you, climate change could be a debate, could be heat waves, but for us, it is a death warrant. If we go there, we cease to exist, basically. I mean, in Pacific, in Caribbean, everywhere. I think. So that is climate. Third part is pollution. And pollution is everywhere, but the emerging economies, I would say, are facing the bigger challenge. You have Nigeria, India, China, Turkey, South Africa, and see the PM 2.5. We are losing around 7% of the global GDP every year due to air pollution alone. If we add arsenic or mercury or other, in waterborne pollution, it is a serious situation. And I'm not talking about plastic. Plastic is another big issue which is being talked, and good news is that the member states have agreed to have a resolution in place and hence a legal framework to at least reduce the single-use plastic. But plastic through production and disposal are a serious problem. So these are some of the planetary crises we always talk. And we need serious action. That means we need investment. And that means somewhere it will be helpful. I mean, you are one, Keith, political masters, they need to understand with clarity the language which their constituency can comprehend. And that is where the economic values of both malign and benign impact of this crisis both can really help. So they are the planetary crises we are referring to.
And you've been a leader, Pushpam, in terms of bridging that vital gap. Most people in politics are not economists, and you're translating this to them. So just a small aside to your comment, we were both at COP15 in Montreal, and I thought it was interesting that people were looking at often with the numbers of species that are disappearing, but not making that connection that you and your colleagues at UNEP and UN Biodiversity have been doing, and saying, look, it's more than that. The loss of biodiversity underpins our health, our food security, our climate change, and it's the ecosystems that underpin that are being destroyed. But conversely, protecting those ecosystems will also have positive outcomes for all of those crises. So when you speak to policymakers, Pushpam, how do you value ecosystem services, and how do you communicate to them in a way they understand?
So that's very perceptive question and needs slightly longer answer. If you see the history of last 200 years, in the beginning, the economists thought that all this ecosystem, of course, they didn't use the word ecosystem, but natural resources, they thought it is free bounty of nature, so they don't need to bother about it. And probably they were not wrong, because the population was not even a billion. I'm talking about the global population in 19th century. And the pressure of Homo sapiens on nature was not that much. But then in the middle of the 20th century, you had economists who had out of proportion confidence, I would say, that, ultimate resource, the brain, can take care of all the problem through innovation, new technology, deployment of new technology. To some extent, it does, no doubt about it. But we also know that natural capital or nature cannot be substituted by other types of capital forever, infinitely. So this limit would, and I'm not talking about Malthusian ghost here, I'm talking about the real substitutability problem of nature by some other types of capital. Now, then you had, since limit to growth, since early 70s, Donella Meadows and others, Jeff Forrester's, and then 87, the World Conference, 1992, the Rio Summit, 2012, Rio Plus 20. And then you had some events coming from multilateral organizations. And they thought that, oh, the biodiversity we are losing, climate change is happening, pollution is there. But still, the hard-boiled financial economist in the National Treasury, Finance Ministry, Multilateral Trust Bank, they will have difficulty to understand what it means for them. Most of this crisis, to speak, remain in the biophysical world. Oh, biodiversity we are losing, or pollution is going up. So what? Now, one of the challenges for the environmental economist and the development practitioner is to translate these biophysical changes into the language and the method which finance and economic side can understand. And then the action will follow. As we all know, if people don't understand the relationship, the nexus, action will not follow. So we will be a passionate group of professionals talking about all kind of things. We are losing this, we are losing that. But when you go to the finance sector, and why finance sector? Because they are the people who create drivers of change through their investment, through their expansion of infrastructure, through many other kind of drivers. They are putting pressure on the planet. If they do not take action, then things will not happen in the right direction. So in order to translate the implications of changes in the conditions and trends of the biophysical world, that is the planetary crisis you have mentioned, I think economics valuation would be needed. And one more thing here, I think we can convince the policy planners and the market in a much more a convincing way if health issue is brought into the discourse, because the environmental issues are not only impacting production and consumption, but it is impacting human health. And I would go one step ahead. I would talk about mental health too. It is impacting the green space. The climate change is impacting all kind of depression, anxiety, and of course, if you see the cardiovascular domain and the neuro thing, those things are there for real. And medical science, at least you would know better than me, Keith, that there are solid evidence and data. Yeah. You want figure, it is available now that the environmental crisis is also a health crisis.
Well,
yeah.
No, please.
No, so I think the challenge and the main responsibility for people like me and you is to translate some of these implications of the biophysical world into the language, into the lexicon, which the development side can understand and act upon. And that is where economic and valuations and analysis of trade-offs can really help.
Well, it's a very powerful bridge. You're actually talking to the power brokers at the cabinet table. And if we speak to the ministers of health, you and I know, they're not the ones who have the power at the cabinet table. We speak to the ministers of finance, and they do, including, by the way, I think the Defense Department too, because they understand the consequences of this that you and your colleagues at UNEP have been speaking about. So I think that you're giving the power brokers at the cabinet table the tools to do the work, the rationale to do it, and the hard economics to it, which is just smart politics. So, and I know UNEP and its bodies that are under it have provided a lot of really important products that people can use. Could you share with us some of those products that UNEP and the bodies underneath it have been used in valuing natural capital and tools that people can use in making smarter development decisions?
Yeah, no, again, UNEP, UNEP has been heavily engaged through the direction from the member states. And our executive director, Inger Anderson, herself is leading the process on valuation, accounting, how to mainstream nature into finance and economics. So she has been very, in the front, leading and providing guidance on this issue. Now, some of the products, one of the issue which we always talk is that how to move beyond GDP. I mean, GDP is great. It is it measures the nation's progress in a limited way, and it has been popular for quite some time, at least since the World War II. But it has limitations that we all know. And when we think of sustainability, human well-being, GDP has serious problem. So instead of over relying on GDP, UNEP has come out with inclusive wealth of the nations. So idea is that when you think of acting, designing policy and intervention, GDP alone should not be guiding you. For simple reason that GDP does not capture many contributions of the nature. It does not capture many of the contributions coming from the human side also. That is
It doesn't capture true value, right? You can't eat money,
right.
But you need to eat food.
Right. So that, as secondly, nations don't keep the status of their wealth the way business firms do. So instead of relying upon just change in GDP, it is better to have some direction from how the wealth of the nations is changing. So in UNEP does biennial inclusive wealth report of the nations, and under that they assess value, human capital, produced capital. I mean, human capital is health, education of the productive workforce. Manufactured capital or produced capital is machine, equipment, building, all those machinery. And natural capital is what we have talked so far: the climate, pollution, biodiversity, fresh water, both surface and the groundwater, both. So those kind of things. And then we do not evaluate them, their change in physical stock, with the help of market price, but we go for accounting and shadow price, which is a technical term, but basically we try to correct the bad part of the market price, I would say. So, and then we calculate shadow price, and that gives you that inclusive wealth of the nation. One more thing here. You will find from our report, from UNEP's report, that many of the nations which are very high on GDP per capita, they are not essentially very high on per capita wealth or per capita inclusive wealth. So what is happening? We have a illusion that we are doing very well, but we are not doing very well, and we are compromising with the sustainability and well-being of the future generations. And one thing here on inclusive wealth, we must know that when we talk about intergenerational equity, right? We can't pass income to the next generation. We will pass only the wealth. So unless we know wealth, how we can pass and how much we can pass, I mean, they are interrelated questions which GDP cannot guide you. So that's why, so inclusive wealth report is one. We also, UNEP on this, they have a big valuation work of valuation of nature for nature-based solution, for restoration finance. The idea is that unless we assess them, value them, it will be very difficult to invite investments in that area. And that's why UNEP has a series of activities at the national level, demonstrating the application of economic theory to the natural resources and natural capital.
And I know I'm glad you're at Ingrid Anderson as being a champion and bringing health into it. She is championing nature-based solutions and connecting the quadruple crises into a Venn diagram where in the middle there are actions we can take that can have quadruple benefits, and you're putting the accurate valuation on them that would make smart politics to any country that chooses to adopt them. I think it was interesting you mentioned the impact upon the non-communicable diseases. It is interesting, isn't it, that the 70% of mortality, the leading causes of disability, are that bucket of non-communicable diseases that are ignored at a policy level. But the nature-based solutions that you're describing not only impact that quadruple crisis, but have powerful impacts upon almost all of those non-communicable diseases and the broader social determinants of health that you described, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Entirely agree with you. Yep. Yep. Well said.
Important. And so if you had to, the obstacles that you find right now, if you to our listeners, to our viewers actually, what are some of the obstacles that you find that why policymakers may not be going down the path of using the natural capital valuations and making smarter decisions regarding development decisions that they're faced with? What are the obstacles and how do we overcome them?
So when we talk about valuation of natural capital or natural resources, we have to understand from very beginning that this is transdisciplinary work. This is, if you are dealing with capital market or dealing with the share, if you are only economist, you can do, and you can do very, very well. But if you are valuing biodiversity, and if you are an economist, you need inputs from plant taxonomists, for example. Similarly, if you are trying to value forests or fish, you need fishery expert, you need foresters, and similarly for the soil and so on and so forth. So it is interdisciplinary, and I would go one step ahead and would call it transdisciplinary, because different disciplines comes and they try to understand each other. It is a tough job. It is not easy because every discipline has their own jargon, their own methodologies, and somehow now things are changing. But conventionally, our training is one discipline, and then we don't try to understand the other, discipline. So there is a need to make the methodological paradigm porous enough so that they can mingle each other. We should not be married to our respective discipline alone if we really want to solve a problem. See, the problem is a problem. It doesn't know the boundary of any discipline. And in that context, having a transdisciplinary approach will be helpful. Right now, it is happening, but we need to expedite this understanding from different disciplines. Second, when we come to the value, sometimes there are many bad valuation, socially irrelevant valuation that we have to be careful. So what I'm trying to convey here, I'm trying to convey that we need community of practitioners who can take this message at a much bigger scale at all levels so that people can see what it means. Third, when we talk about why valuation is not being used by the policymaker, I mean, they're being used, but not the way we would like to see. The reason is we as professionals lack confidence. I mean, I always see that in media, people come with all kind of valuation, very confident and clear. Somehow economists are not clear what they are trying to convey to the head of states, to the policymakers. And that is where we need clarity. We need simple message. I'm not saying one should be flatly wrong, but what I'm saying that a lot of effort has to go into that direction where messaging can be done properly. Fourth, I think the data is the issue. I can share with you and the audience that we have real challenge in getting the good data on the natural capital. But then that should not stop us. I mean, people have been working And maybe in due course of time, data will improve. And by the way, right now, we have much better data than what it was in early 1990s, for example. So things are improving, but data remains a challenge. And finally, I would say, it is not a last but not the least, what you say, uh, we always, whenever we try to convey the role and relevance of economic valuation for nature, we must uh, build this argument or narrative around what is the problem this will solve. So unless what is the hard-hitting policy questions which this evaluation will do, only then you have traction with the policymakers. Otherwise, it becomes a very good academic exercise, which is good, we all love it, but then it will be, the policymaker will find it hard to embrace and use. So I think these are some of the challenges. If we can overcome in the short run, it will be helpful.
And that's important for our audience. I mean, CUGH, we have 34,000 people on our network. That's, you've laid out a very important challenge for people to take it up. And I would submit, as you do you agree, because you're doing this work all the time, that we don't have the luxury of time. The challenges and crises before us are vastly outstripping the pace of action, and the consequences of not doing what we need to do, whether it's climate change or biodiversity losses, or as you mentioned, pollution, the cost of that vastly exceeds the cost of acting now. Right.
Absolutely.
And so, if in closing, Dr. Kumar, as we're at the bottom of the hour, what are some of the final messages that you would like to give to the audience? Because we have people around the world who say, "I want to act, I'm worried." You hear that all the time. What advice can you give to them? What can they do?
I will pick up, the last point which you mentioned, the cost of action versus cost of inaction. Point one, we must understand that whether it is pandemic or whether it is loss of climate, biodiversity or climate, in all those areas, if you bring economics into the picture, you will realize that the cost of inaction, cost of not doing anything, cost of not designing intervention, not implementing, is huge. It is much, much higher than doing something. I mean, we know a Stern report has shown us that if you act, it will cost you just 5% of GDP. But if you don't act, it will cost you 20% of GDP. Of course, that was a very simplified message, but nonetheless, it conveys the point that cost of inaction is not the choice. So that is one. Second, my colleagues and fellow professionals from the public health and other areas, whenever somebody comes with economic analysis, the idea is not that somebody is trying to prove superiority of one discipline. It is not that we want everybody to be converted on the dollar yardstick. Not that. But the way we are living our practical life, I think economic valuation will improve the decision making and the efficiency of the decisions and choices. So we should take in that, a spirit. I have seen many smokes and fire where economists start talking about, the statistical value of life, that due to mortality and morbidity, how much we are losing. And people become very, very furious that how can you value life? But the same person, when you buy a premium from insurance company, you are paying, you are valuing your life. So it should not arouse the emotions and passions in the wrong directions. And I'm also not saying that we should value life to do a trading of 5 Keith Martin equal to 10 Pushpam Kumar. That is not the purpose. That is not the purpose. Purpose is that in order to divert resource towards sustainability, towards restoration, valuation is helpful. If we value the mortality and morbidity impact of any wrong practice or any cost of inaction, then it is basically to tell you that we need investment in that area. So it is not it's not for trading purpose in the wrong direction, but it is with all good intentions that we need investment, because here in this room, we can be economists, you can be public health experts, or somebody can be a biodiversity expert. But at the end of the day, we are father, we are brother, we are sisters too. And we would like to see the future generation is able to see the clear sky, green mountain, and clean water. If that we cannot give, then I think GDP or all these statistics and the yardstick may not be able to help to the sustainability and human well-being. So in that spirit, the economics should be used and embraced. I will stop here.
Well, that's a great way to end, Dr. Pushpam Kumar, the Senior Economic Advisor to the UN Environment Program. Pushpam, that was a very powerful way and a challenge to all of us to recognize that we have an obligation, a moral obligation to future generations to leave the world a better place than it is. And it's our obligation to change the curve of where we're going right now across the quadruple environmental challenges we're facing on this one earth, this one globe that we all share, regardless of the country we live in, one planet for all. So I hope all of the audience will understand that they take a look at UN Environment Program's website, look at the programs and the tools that you have developed, learn about them, take them, use them, share them, because those tools that UNEP have put together and the organizations underneath it are really practical, powerful tools. We don't have the luxury of time to research is important, but we have to vastly exceed the pace of our action and the depth of what we're actually doing to affect these challenges. And if we don't, then we will be living in a planet that is going to be gravely ill, as so will we. Dr. Kumar, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We greatly appreciate your time, sir.
Pleasure.
Great support to you and the entire UNEP family for all of what you do to make our world a healthier, better place for all.
Thank you very much.